Welcome. If you're just joining us, I'll leave the poll up for another moment here. Let us know if you're using AI technologies in your conversational marketing and sales programs. But today is measuring the impact of AI in your marketing and sales pipeline. I am your host, Paul Raitzer. If you're not familiar with me, I'm the founder and CEO of Marketing AI Institute and I guess PR 2020 technically, with my agency, which I sold a few months ago. Still a CEO there though. And we are joined today by Ronell Hugh from Drift. And Ronell, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? When I went to your LinkedIn page and we first, planned to do this, I was like, man, I could talk to this guy all day long with your background at Microsoft and Walmart and Adobe. So just give the people a little background on kind of where you're at, how you got into the AI piece and just sort of your role today at Drift.
Yeah, definitely, Paul. Thank you. And great to be here with you today and everybody's joining in. So a little bit about me. I joined Drift almost just over 4 months ago to drive and lead product marketing, customer advocacy. But my prior life, if you will, before that, I spent a lot of time in the consumer world. So did some sports PR, worked at Walmart leading their North America entertainment marketing, and then had a stint in gaming as well with Xbox at Microsoft. So a lot of my career was spent really kind of driving more consumer experiences and engagements and fan type of engagements. It was a lot of fun. And then some point in there, I decided like, okay, I was always focused on learning. Like I wanted to learn more and continue to grow. And that's how I typically make my career decisions. Like where can I go and stretch myself, make myself maybe feel a little bit more uncomfortable. And had an opportunity to join Adobe in the summer of 2016. They reached out to me to help drive one of their businesses. And after a year of being there, I was telling Paul this when we first chatted, I got asked to lead a new product offering that they were building. It was probably the first thing they had built from the ground up in a decade, called Adobe Experience Platform. So that was my introduction, not just into, data platforms, but also AI and machine learning and how, marketers are using AI and machine learning specifically at that point around developing more holistic profiles of their customers. So using a way to kind of help understand and bring in more inputs from a data standpoint into a profile to make it that much better to personalize. And so it was fascinating to kind of enter into that space and to kind of see the power that comes with hyper personalization, especially specifically around like, hey, how AI and machine learning can help advance that. And so, it was fun. And so I'm happy to be here today. Happy to be at Drift and really helping customers to think about how they use conversations and conversational AI specifically to help improve their customer experiences.
Yeah, I love the background you have kind of on the consumer side. And, I'm always a big believer that the best consumer experiences are what we should be doing in B2B. So, I mean, if you're a B2B marketer, there's that same level of personalization and convenience that people are used to when dealing with consumer brands, that should be carried through. You should have that same level. And to date, it just hasn't been there. And I think it's what AI enables is this much greater level of personalization that, as we're going to talk about today, can create much greater value for the end user, but much greater ROI for the organization that it makes the investments in these smarter technologies. So that's awesome.
I agree.
All right, so then just a couple quick slides here about the Institute. If you're not familiar with Marketing AI Institute, we're a media event and online education company. Our main premise is that within the next 3 to 5 years, at least 80% of what marketers and sales professionals as well do every day is going to be intelligently automated to some degree. And what we mean by that is just like in your consumer life where AI is present in Netflix and Spotify and Google Maps and Gmail and your iPhone and everywhere it's seamlessly integrated in your life. That's what's going to happen with marketing and sales software. We're going to arrive at a point in the coming years where it's just seamlessly infused, but we're not there yet and we're nowhere close really. And so what we're trying to do, kind of our mission, is to make this information approachable and actionable to you. So that's the gist of what we're trying to do with webinars like this, with information that we provide through the Institute, through our events, through online education. And this is part of our monthly series. This is our free monthly series. So there's a bit.ly link there. We can put that in the chat as well. But if you want to go back, there's probably about 15 or 20 on-demand webinars. And if you're just looking to get started and looking for some free access to education and content, check this out. And then also just a plug for Drift. They have amazing online education. Mark Killens and his team at Drift do an incredible job with online courses and training and webinars and everything. So Drift's got a ton of resources there as well. So with that, I'm going to step aside. I'm going to hang out, and if people have questions, Q&A chat, I'm going to monitor that, and I can jump in and ask Ronell some questions as we're going, but we're going to save time at the end for that as well. And Ronell, if you want to take it over, and I'll go ahead and share the results so we can see what we're working with here.
Yeah,
so you
definitely.
can see, there you go. You got 32% are using AI tech, 55% are not, 14% aren't sure.
Aren't sure. Well,
Yeah.
and it's interesting to see, because I think today, hopefully you'll get a sense. And if you're not, maybe it will get you excited about potentially using AI. And if you're not sure, maybe checking with your marketing operations team to see what they've implemented as a part of your stack. But today we're going to talk about these 4 areas. I will kind of walk you through the agenda real quick, but this is our agenda for the day. We're going to talk about the power of AI today, the financial impact that it can have on your pipeline, and then the future of marketing and sales as it relates to AI. So these are key areas I think that we'll be able to hit on today. With that, I wanted to kind of start with this whole idea of the power of AI today. The then and now of that, right? Now, when you think about then, use of traditional form-based lead qualification and inbound phone calls, and they all had some rudimentary chat tools. Right? It was easy kind of to do that with chat, but it was actually very reactive and slow and inefficient, right? So the traditional leads qualification methods that kind of resulted in slow and inefficient sales processes. It can make it complicated and maybe more jumbled up, which then also impacted sales teams, right? They spent hours manually processing emails and forms or voicemails, and they sometimes took days to respond to prospects. That's probably the bigger challenge, right? Like being able to respond quickly to prospects who may have already taken their business elsewhere. And I think that's, as marketing teams, they were under pressure to provide leads or finding ways to increase the quantity of their leads as well without wasting time. So, that, as we think about it, then also led to missed opportunities. So when we think about now, and when we think about how AI can impact that, it's the ability to qualify and to respond to prospects in real time, to meet them where they're at, right? To meet that buyer where they're at in real time. And then that creates an opportunity to improve the quantity and quality of leads while also reducing the customer response times, right? That's a huge part of it. Paul's talked about something I think is so important. In my B2C life, you wanted to engage with customers in real time and actually had like more, if you will, natural language conversations with them to help them to feel like, hey, this brand cares about me. And I think in B2B, we're slowly getting there, right? The opportunity for us to connect, to do that. The other part that I think is interesting is that now you're able to drive improvement in pipeline without the need of increasing sales time or the sales team size, right? So rather than actually having to increase more people, put more people in seats, or butts in seats, if you will, we're able to use AI to help be a part of the team and actually provide a benefit in that area and improve that engagement with customers. And then the last part I would say is that it's improved the customer experience, right? There's increased sales satisfaction, improvement in the brand equity because of this. And then also you're able to scale your marketing and sales teams more efficiently. And so you see the contrast here of what it was and what it can be. So for those of you who responded to say, okay, I'm not sure if I'm using it or I'm not, think about this in terms of your organization and what you're doing. So now I want to talk about what does that mean, right? And AI has a unique opportunity to generate qualified pipeline 24/7, right? We talked about having somebody in a seat, butts in seat, people there to actually respond to customers when they're looking or have questions. And it's interesting to think about it because when you are able to use AI to be, in a way, an extension of your sales teams and your marketing teams, you can do these 4 things, right? You have the ability to capture intent in a way that adds value for the prospects. You can understand kind of what their intent is. You're able to qualify leads faster, right? Again, you're scaling your organization faster without additional headcount, and then you're delivering revenue with higher yield per rep, right? So you're able to leverage AI to help you to do that. Now, when I think about that, I want to use an example. We're going to use Okta. Okta, if you aren't aware of who Okta is, they help manage identities for 2 groups, their workforces and customers. Those are the 2 groups. And Okta also helps protect and enable workforce employees and contractors and their partners to use any technology on any device. So Okta has become a massive part of what we do every day. And the other thing that I want to mention about Okta is that they're a customer of ours, and they really are focused on, they had probably a couple challenges before AI, right? First, rapid scaling and growth, right? That was one of the things that they had, that was a challenge for them. The other thing that came up was that their ability to increase the ability to capture intent in a way that adds value for the prospects. They also had a challenge with accelerating the process of passing leads to the sales teams, right? So how do you increase that and make that more natural and make it more effective? And then they also wanted to create a more dynamic customer experience. And then the last thing was then reducing the friction and route time that they had. And so that's really, in their first use case, they really kind of think about how they could use conversational AI to do that. And as you see here on the right of the screen, using chat to engage with the customer and have those conversations, and also to collect information to really start to drive that. And so that was their first use case. Their second use case was all around this idea of like white glove approach on high intent pages for high conversion rates, right? So the speed to deliver or speed to lead with a white glove approach was super important. And so they wanted to have a high attention to detail. So with inbound teams sitting on their phones waiting for these, they were able to save time for their sales team to increase efficiency of the inbound motion, right? So they were able to extend and provide that white glove experience, but then also have their teams being more efficient in their time and how they're using their time to actually drive better engagements with their customers. Now, the last use case that I wanted to share was around virtual events. And so this whole idea with what we saw with Okta was, using bots to register attendees before the event, and then engaging with them during the event, and then maybe retargeting them after. So they call their employees Octonauts, right? So Octonauts were manning the chats, which is kind of cool, and they were able to generate or gather data points from registration, attendees, and interactions that that enabled them to either answer questions or help direct them to the right sessions or whatever they were looking for. So it was a unique way of using chat to do that, but also created a more scalable approach to this than having, again, more people doing this. You're able to use, again, conversational AI to drive those engagements. And so it's interesting now, if you think about those use cases, what are some of the financial impacts of AI technology, right? Like, what do we see as the impact that comes because customers really thinking about the buyer first and what that experience looks like are really trying to engage in a meaningful way, but there's also obviously an impact for your company. So at Drift, we worked with Forrester and we commissioned a study conducted by Forrester Consulting to look at the total economic impact, right, to see how Drift's revenue acceleration platform can help companies. Now, the purpose of the study was to provide readers with a framework to help them evaluate the potential financial impact and the benefits of Drift. And so they looked at what are benefits, what are the costs, the risks associated with experience using Drift. And so for the purposes of the study, Forrester aggregated the experiences of and interviewed 4 customers, right, and combined the results into a single composite organization. So today we're going to use this study to discuss the impact of AI generally. And so the thought that I want to start with is that prospective customers are online all hours and all of the day, and the power in the buying process is important. So our customers know the importance of having the right conversation at the right time, and have seen how getting the right results leads to more revenue, right? So let's talk a little bit about the numbers. It's a big number, 670% ROI. These are the results from the study, and they're based on a 3-year analysis, right? So here's the 3 things I wanted to highlight. The first thing is what we recognize through the numbers and through the study is that 1, it improved brand equity, right? Customers expect brands to provide cutting edge experiences using the latest and greatest technologies. And that's super important and critical for customers. And I think it's actually interesting. In my previous life, we would talk about how as consumers, we expect that if you go and have a negative experience with a brand, you leave, right? You opt out, and it's actually beginning to be that way in B2B as well. Like when you have a negative experience, you have more people that have the opportunity to buy services. If they have a negative experience, they're not going to want to go back if they haven't had a positive experience. So that improvement in brand equity is critical. I tend to see, again, coming from my background in B2C, coming to B2B, we don't value, or typically don't value that brand equity as much. Right. And it is an important part because your brand becomes synonymous with experience. We all know that. Think about things that you buy where you're like, okay, if I buy this product, it's synonymous with me having a good experience. Right. Now, the second thing here was the hardened business continuity. And like, what does that mean? Well, businesses can now run 24/7, regardless of any disruptions that may affect their sales reps. Right. So their sales reps don't have to be online all the time to engage with customers. So it's actually a massive benefit when you can then engage with a customer at any point, right? It doesn't matter when they're coming to your site or when they're coming to look for information or scouring your, they're coming in terms of trying to engage and get information. And now you can use conversational AI to actually engage with them in a more natural way when they're there, right? And then what happens after that is that it connects then with those reps who are responsible for that account, depending on who that account is.
Ronell, one thought there on the kind of, I think it's important to distinguish here when we're talking about conversational AI versus a chatbot. Just like that, the people who said, no, I don't have AI technology may just have a chatbot, and they may be thinking, well, my chatbot's available 24/7. I don't need AI tech. But the challenge with traditional chatbots is it's all rules-based. There's no intelligence in them. You, the human, the marketer, the salesperson, you write rules that says, if they click this, then say this. But inevitably, they're going to get very quickly to the thing that says, I need a human agent. Like, let me talk to a human. And if it's after hours, we'll get back to you in the morning, like leave your email address. And so what we're saying here is that doesn't have to be the case, that language understanding and generation has made leaps forward in recent years, and Drift's been one of the leaders in integration of those advancements in their conversational agents, to where you as a B2B buyer, I can go on looking at software at 9 o'clock at night, because that's when I'm working now, and I can interact with a true intelligent conversational agent that can understand where I'm at in my buying process or where I'm at in my information gathering process, and can actually potentially get me to an endpoint without me having to ask to talk to the human agent the next day when I'm done. Now I've moved on. I got to do the other thing tomorrow morning. So I think that's a key distinction for people of what we're saying between an AI-powered conversational agent and a human-coded chatbot that just has rules that lead to you're going to talk to the human anyway.
Yeah, no, great point, Paul. And I think it's super important to understand that, because this is not about rules-based, right? It's like rules-based isn't really natural, right? It's an if-then, if you will. If they say this, then this happens. And I think we see the opportunity to use AI to make it more natural. So that engagement is really trying to make that interaction seem like they're actually engaging with a human being. And the second to last thing I want to share here is around improved scalability. So like Paul has actually just mentioned it, this allows organizations to automate their existing processes, right? So because you're able to do that, you're able to use AI to kind of automate that and kind of engage, you're enabling internal teams then to be more effective, right? They have more opportunity to focus on other, like continue prospecting, engaging with customers, or actually following through, right? And allowing the AI to actually do that initial engagement to help to refine and qualify. And the last thing I want to say is this whole idea around, actually I'll move to the next slide, is that, how does this work? Like, what does this mean now? Conversations lead and pipeline conversation rates. Like, what happens? AI provides digital transformation channels to answer questions and then qualify prospects in real time. So when an organization implements AI, they're capturing the prospects in the moment, right? They're engaging them within the moment, like Paul was talking about, like, hey, he's online at 9 o'clock at night. He's able to engage, and they're capturing that information. Now, this then increases the opportunity to establish meetings, right? Because you're engaging with them, the likelihood of now capturing that person and being able to say, okay, let's follow back up and set up a time to further engage with them, have a meeting, you're able to do that. And it's also created an opportunity then for like even more with intelligent targeting and routing. So organizations, they're improving the quality of their leads because they're able to use this. And that isn't then increasing the likelihood of converting them to pipeline, which is really what we're trying to accomplish, right? We're trying to focus on the buyer and then really think about what the buyer needs and having more smart and more nurturing engagements that then hopefully lead them to actually improving, if they were for my business's pipeline, but hopefully helping that buyer to really get what they need and are looking for. So one of the things that we highlighted that we wanted to talk about in the report that we saw was, what does this mean now for your ARR, right? And the thing that we saw is that it improved it, by 17.5%. So organizations can use AI to make recommendations to existing customers about opportunities during relevant points in their customer life cycle. So when they're engaging, they're able to understand when to engage, right? It also allows for making contextual information available to customers in a more organic manner and helping increase cross-sell and upsell in existing accounts. So you can start to see how AI becomes really a part of your day-to-day business, right? You can use it strategically and really to help magnify or multiply what your organization is already doing. Now, the last thing that I wanted to kind of highlight on this too is around, the increase in efficiency, which we saw in the report, is that it's up by 50%. So organizations used AI chatbots to deflect unqualified prospects. So they're deflecting those and also non-sales related inquiries away from sales representatives. So you're not tying up time with your sales representative for things that really, they're not, aren't really what they need to answer. They can find other avenues or mechanisms to answer that. Additionally, organizations enabled virtual selling assistants, so VSAs, if you will, to converse with prospects during non-working hours. So Paul highlighted that a little bit too. And then they also were able to provide them with relevant information or even schedule meetings. So instead of spending 8 hours going through responses from people trying to coordinate demos, trying to coordinate calendars, et cetera, they leverage technology to help them to do that and actually save some time.
And again, here, I think, and I don't know the background of this exact screenshot, but the premise of AI and the promise of AI is there's a chance that the conversational agent wasn't trained on that question. So what's happening here is, do you integrate with Salesforce? The AI can absorb all the information from the site or whatever other documents provided to it by the organization. Somewhere within there lives the answer to this question. It may have a list of integrations or something like that. And the AI has the ability, when trained, to actually respond in a natural language way as though a human, a sales rep, answered this question. But the tech where it is and where it's going is that we can't, as marketers and as salespeople, think of the 20,000 different questions in the exact phrase that someone might want to ask at any given time. But we don't have to anymore because the AI can be trained on an initial set, and then it can continually learn as it's fed more information. And in an ideal world, learns from the other questions. So if it gives this answer and that ends up satisfying the end user and they're happy with that response, the machine learning component can realize that was a good response to give the person that was asking the question. And it actually learns and gets smarter. And that's the key, is none of that exists in rules-based chatbots, where it's just all written rules and all branching logic, if-thens. So what we're talking about is this whole new possibility, this new space where you can create these agents that really can learn and adapt with you.
Now, Paul, and I think that's super critical, right? The idea of AI is it's really an opportunity to help scale, but it can get smarter, right? It's learning, it's understanding, and it's able to then scale appropriately as you have others coming in and asking questions. That isn't just focused on that singular customer who's asking the question or buyer who's asking the question. It actually gets leverage across your entire, system, right? That's learning that it's generating, and then now is able to leverage it with whoever's coming in. And over time, it gets smarter, so it can actually start to predict, oh, if a customer says this, then they're probably looking for this, right? And you think about using that type of motion when you're doing marketing and sales. So if somebody's researching for services and they're trying to understand it, you're hearing them and understanding their intent, and they're giving you better context. And then you wrap that in, then sharing that with your sales team. So whether it's the account executive, the SDR, BDR, whoever it may be, they are able to then engage with them because they know, hey, they're asking these questions. We tend to know if people are asking these questions, it makes it easier for us to engage with them because we know what they're looking for. We have more context around the intent they're trying to accomplish. It's interesting. So when we talk about AI, one thing you have to think about is the cost to consider, right? So what does that look like when you're looking at investing? So for that group that said they don't know or they didn't, so I think that was probably over 60%. I can't remember the numbers at my top of my head, but let's consider the cost. The first one is fees. So in this case, annual drift fees, obviously, it's the organizations incur a subscription fee based on the number of seats or feature sets that they use, right? So you have to think about in context of that. Well, you're thinking of this as seats, right? You're adding another person to your organization to help supplement what you need to do, and this seat becomes virtually like a virtual person, if you want to think of it in that way, that now is engaging you with your customers on your behalf. The other thing is like the implementation costs, right? Organizations incur internal labor costs and setup fees to do this. And so during the initial 1 or 2 months of implementation, so that's what you have to think about too. Do you have the right people, right? Do you have the right people and processes in place to actually implement this to be the most effective? And then the last part is the training costs. So organizations need to then invest in training sales representative to using these capabilities more effectively. Specific in this case, Drift, how do you use it to actually drive your business more effectively and engaging with it in the right way, right? So that's kind of some things to consider as you're thinking about, hey, what does this look like for me? What should I be considering when I'm thinking about this? Now, there are some benefits to this, right? I mean, from the report, some of the things that we saw in terms of benefits are that there's improved new pipeline and revenue over a 3-year period. Here's the numbers for at least the 4 customers that they use as a part of the total economic study that they did, about $8.9 million over a 3-year period. It increased cross-sell and upsell opportunities, and then it increased sales representative efficiency, right? And so I think all those areas are super important to organizations. You're getting new customers, you're keeping existing customers, and you're improving the quality and efficiency of their sales representative engagement, all things that hopefully lead to a better buyer experience. And that's shown through in terms of new sales and upsell. Now let's kind of dive into the third item that I had on the agenda, which is the future of marketing and sales AI. So the ability to empathetically connect with buyers through chatbots or virtual agents and live chat will continue to grow, right? It's a major important part of the B2B buyers, and B2B buyers need to embrace digital channels, right? As they embrace digital channels and they start to do that more, we're going to start to see how this is such a critical part of that. Now, what does this mean for marketers? The first thing here that I want to highlight is that buyers and customers trust that conversations with AI bots will help them, not just qualify them, right? So we have to kind of think of it in terms of like, hey, is it really providing the right information? Is it actually engaging with them in a more meaningful way, not just trying to point them to, hey, buy, because that's going to be super important.
And not to like jump in and put a marketers versus sales lens to this, but at the end of the day, the salesperson isn't as often concerned with that. The salesperson usually has a quota they're trying to hit, and like they might be 1A is going to be, how do I sell with this? Yeah. 1B might be, how do I build better relationships? And it's probably flipped when you're the marketer and you're in this conversation. You have to spend more time thinking about the long-term customer value. You have to think about the relationships, the brand equity, like those things you highlighted earlier tend to usually fall under the marketer's domain. And so for you as the marketer to understand, it's not just a pure conversion game, but how can you actually leverage these, conversational AI agents to do these other things beyond just transactional values? And that's really what many times the marketer's role is going to be in assessing this technology and thinking about its application.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And it kind of actually leads to kind of the second point here is that, customers self-serve, right? So it's an opportunity there. And so your team can spend more time building relationships and less time answering common questions, right? The team is really, think about it, like from B2C, if you think about it in that context, it's all about establishing and maintaining really, really good relationships. Excuse me, pardon me. And so that's a key part to this as well. Thank you. The other part is like, being able to surface trends, trending topics and themes across conversations, right? It's super powerful and meaningful for marketers. Like you're not guessing anymore, right? Like the old ways, one of the things that Paul and I were talking about when I was at Walmart, we would do it would be like we would do an analysis on our spend and understand how our spend was working. And then that took 6 months to do that, or 3 months. And then by the time we got it, things had already changed or shifted. All right, think about if you're able to identify new trends in real time and how that improves your engagement or the information that you're sharing or the content that you're delivering with customers as they're going through that buyer experience of trying to figure out like, what do I need, right? And so it's powerful to think about what can happen. And then the last part I will say is that you're able to spend more time on high intent conversations. So that's really what we want to be doing, right? Like AI can help engage in that area and help you to find ways that you're doing this. Now for sellers, there's a lot here for sellers. What does this mean for sellers? Well, they're able to automate the sales process a little bit more, right? So they're able to enhance productivity by automating where their processes are doing. So that increases productivity. And so that enables them, to help them manage their calendars and for scheduling or meeting, and helps them to be more effective or efficient that way. The other thing is being able to forecast both internally and externally. So being able to make predictions. Artificial intelligence systems exist that can predict or forecast outcomes using historical data to inform future results, right? So you think about when you're able to use that, what is it helping your sales teams to do in terms of how they're engaging with customers? So common predictions that sales AI systems can make include some of these. So I'm just gonna read these off. Deals or prospects most likely to close, deals or prospects to target next, new customers that may be interested in what you're selling. And then using the same type of data analysis, AI can help sales managers forecast their team's performance for the quarter well in advance. So you start to think about really important ways that your business needs to run and operate, how AI can play a role in that. The other thing that I think is super important here and that we have highlighted is that you're able to prioritize leads based on scores the AI has given them, right? So an AI can bring a level of logic and standardization to the process that humans can't match, right? And so it's powerful to see what happens there. And then the last part that we've talked about before already is that your team has support 24/7, right? So that's massive. Now I want to finish up and kind of give you the takeaways here, right? First thing is that from improving buyer experiences to driving pipeline, AI has changed the game for marketing and sales teams. It truly has, right? It's provided so many new ways. And we just talked through some of those options there, or what you could do as marketers and sellers to actually improve your organization, your efficiency, your engagement with buyers, and what that can really mean for how you power your organization. The second item here is that there's a financial impact that AI has, and it's incredible, right? 670% ROI, that's massive, right? Seeing what happens over 3 years in terms of new pipeline sales, upsells to existing customers, and then what sales teams can do in terms of their efficiency is really something that every organization is looking at. And the last thing is that we all have this knowledge, and we all understand that AI will continue to grow in importance as we advance further digitally, right? I think as everybody's aware of this, things have progressed with digital transformation quickly over the last 2 years. And I think it will continue to do that. And now a lot of buyers, a lot of customers are expecting those experiences to be more connected, more personal, and more meaningful, and really moving from being what it typically was from a B2B standpoint to being more B2C-like. And so as you think about that, my only call to action for you is like, hey, take a moment, download this free report from Drift. Here's a link, we can share that with you, and learn more about what we have and our total economic impact of Drift as you think about what you can do as it relates to AI. Thank you.
Unmute. Thank you, Ronell. That was great. And if you can stop sharing the screen if you want, we can just go to chat. We've got some questions coming out already. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on those. The one thing I wanted to talk about up front is this idea, you talked about the costs of doing this, and I don't think people really understand this. If you haven't gone through integration of AI technology, I think there can be a misconception that you just buy this AI tech and it magically reduces costs and accelerates revenue. And and it just does its thing. But you highlighted some of the things people need to think about when you're getting any AI technology. But conversational AI in particular does have quite a bit of onboarding and training that goes into it. So, if I go and say, okay, this was amazing. We're using a rules-based chatbot on my site. We need to level up. Like, we got to get the smarter technology. Talk to us a little bit about that process. Like, if I'm going to make this move and I'm going to go get this, there are the costs of the technology you highlighted. There's the onboarding, of putting that technology in place and the time it takes to learn. There's the upskilling of your team. Like, what should people be thinking about as they move into this realm of bringing in smarter technology, and how AI doesn't just out of the box work at 100%? There's a time investment that's made to use AI technology.
Yeah, I always tend to think about it in this way, and putting this technology aside, and I actually used to do this a lot when I worked for Adobe. It's like, it's about people, process, and technology, right? How are you organizing all three of those areas in your organization, right? It was fascinating to me, actually. For several years, I'd go and speak to, senior executives of companies and say, okay, everybody was always asking me about the technology. Like, well, I need this technology, it'll solve my problems. I'm like, well, yeah, you can implement, license the technology, and that's great. But if your processes aren't in place to actually help you to use it correctly, then that technology is not going to be truly beneficial. When I say processes, like, how are you set up organizationally? Are the right teams in place to work together? Do you have the right type of stack in place that can leverage that technology in a more meaningful way? Now, one thing I allude to there as well is, and I already said it, people. Like, again, organizationally, have you hired the right people who have a background and knowledge in the space that actually can help you to really refine this for your organization? Right? Because this has become extremely customizable by organization. One thing that I'll share is, like, one thing that we're trying to do better at, and I think many in this space are, is like, how do we actually start to think more vertically? Like, what does this mean by verticals, and what do we see as trends across verticals, and how they can use AI to benefit, whether that's retail, financial services, healthcare, like, what does that really look like? And so that's typically where I start, right? In kind of thinking through, like, hey, what are your people, processes, and technologies? And usually what I see organizations do, they start with a technology. Like, I need to have this technology. I'm like, well, that's great, but can you get your people organized and your processes set up in the right way before you actually start to think about integrating your technology to actually make this more impactful?
And I love your point. Like, this isn't about just AI technology, it's technology in general. I mean, how many of us buy this amazing new tech and then it just sits there doing 10% of what it's capable of because no one on your team is trained to use it, or because you haven't integrated into your strategy? You budgeted for the tech, but you didn't budget for the fact that you don't know how to use the tech.
Yeah.
And so does that mean you have to go get an agency or a consultant for the first 6 months to, like, get you onboarded? You have to use the services of the tech company to get you on. Like, you really need to have a business case for this, and then to have it baked into your strategy. It's just so essential.
Yeah. And to your point, there has to be a strategy. Like, buying technology isn't a strategy. that's the output of the strategy, right? And I think we tend to forget that. And it's like, okay, we now have a strategy in place. And to your point, Paul, we can now implement that, right?
Yeah, and even the ROI, the whole premise of this webinar, the ROI is not an apples to apples for every organization. The answers to the questions we were just proposing determine the ROI for you. The ROI may improve over time, but in the first 6 to 12 months, it might be quite low because you're going to have to invest more in the people, the processes, the things that are going to get it working at an optimal level. And so your ROI may be low in the first 3 to 6 months, but that's critical, that when you're making the business case internally for the investment, that you identify that this is what 3, 6, 12 months looks like with this tech. Here's where we expect to kind of hit the optimal level and really start seeing a return from this investment. So you don't go in with this expectation. You sold an AI tool to the C-suite and they're just sitting back waiting for the magic to happen. And that's not what this is. It's not what any marketing technology is.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, if you choose to download the report, you'll get some of this out of it, right? Like, I'm trying to go pull it up right now, but it's interesting to see, because we did it based on a 3-year analysis, but there was some information, and I have to recall this, but around what happens after the first year, right? But to what Paul is highlighting, if we were able to actually understand and see the impact of what's happening with this type of investment over a period of time, it's massive, right? And one of the things that we saw in our study, and I actually just pulled it up and I found that, it's like the payback period that we saw was 6 months, right? So if you organize in that way, and you're doing the right things and getting yourself organized, like you are able to see the payback now in a 6-month period, based upon the analysis that Forrester was able to do. So super important.
Right, we got another question. Have you encountered cases where potential business has invested so much with another chatbot or conversational AI platform for their customer support organization that they are unable or willing to sign up with a different new provider for their sales and marketing conversational AI, such as Drift? And I think, I'll let you obviously take this one now, but to what you said earlier, the parallel between, you could replace conversational AI with any marketing tech, your CRM, your automation, like that's always going to be an issue. So I think it's a really good question, but I think the point they're making is you may already have this on the customer support side. Do we need a different tool, or do those tools have to be the same for the marketing and sales side? And how do we bridge that gap internally?
Yeah, it's actually a really good question, right? I think many organizations, and this is where we typically saw chat, like when Drift started in 2015, we saw an opportunity to use chat in a different way, right? That it wasn't just a support tool. It actually could be on the pre-sale side, if you will. And so I have seen that, to the individual's question. Like I have seen that where there's been a struggle, right? Because the companies are saying, well, I've already invested here, or why can't I use this? It's not built to do that. Like, a lot of customer support systems are built for ticketing, and answering questions that are more related to that, or sending you to the right technician to help you with your challenges, right? The way that on a more of a pre-sale side that it works from a marketing and sales is really that nurturing and that more engagement that we're talking about. We look at it in this context. We're looking at it from a buyer lens and how we engage with the buyer, rather than like pushing things onto the buyer. How are we engaging with them in a natural way that helps them to go through their buying experience, getting the answers that they need and in the time that they need it, right? And so these systems have been working separately. I think there's a massive opportunity to bring them together. And really the point of this is that the customer lifecycle, or as I like to say, the customer journey, right? When a customer comes in, they're researching, they're trying to understand. They then have a desire to maybe even demo or test it out, and then they want to buy, right? And then there's the post-sales experience. So what's happening with loyalty, what's happening with customer support or service. Like, fascinating thing to think about. If you could tie all that data together, how much more informed does that give you? So if a customer's having a challenge on the back end, and through AI start to identify there's trends there of something that you can do from a sales standpoint, you can upsell a customer on these when you see these types of concerns or attributes or types of concerns. It actually completes that cycle, continues that cycle of research and buying, and then in service and support. So to the question, I think I have seen it creates a ton of challenges, and it causes organizations to reflect on, again, what's their strategy, right? And then what can they do together? And I think there's a lot of organizations that have multiple chatbots working on their site that they don't even know about because different teams have implemented them, right? Which I think in my mind is like, okay, where is all that data sitting? And is it conversing? Is it working together to give you the best information holistically for your organization?
And I think that's where understanding the integrations that the provider offers, because at the end of the day, if you have the customer service one and you have the sales and marketing, they all need to be in the CRM, whatever the CRM platform is that you're using. So the more important question may even become, do they both integrate with the CRM? And even if I get this secondary tool for sales and marketing, is the data still going to get where it needs to go so that we can do our job as salespeople? So yeah, it's a good thought to be asking. I don't know the context of this question, but I'm just going to ask it. So to your knowledge, is there any sales management theory practice that embrace AI ML as a main backbone? Does that make sense to you? I'm not sure.
I think I get the intent of the question. And just me being completely transparent and honest, like I've been at Drift for 4 months. So are there any sales management theories or practices? I think it's evolving. I think it's a new space to be in, right? I think most sales management teams have been used to actually having people, right? And I think now thinking about AI and how that could be leveraged in a more meaningful way. Like I literally over the last several months have had conversations with former colleagues or sales rep people that I used to work with at Adobe or other companies saying, well, how can we use AI to help us? Can we use AI in a way to actually just kind of complete the whole sales cycle without actually engaging with the person? And can you do it that way? So I think there's a lot more interest in this space. So I was saying, I just clicked up some more to your question. Like, I think there's a lot more. I think you'll see this continue to evolve. Right. So I don't know of any. I'm not saying there isn't. I don't know of any theories or practices, but I have started to see a ton of interest and questions around this topic.
And then We have one from Spencer. How advanced are the current predictive scoring of sales leads? Is it able to track, identify correlators that are not currently taken into account and make changes to their own assumptions? So first, does Drift have lead scoring built into the product, or is it a third-party integration that does the lead scoring?
Yeah, I mean, Drift has lead scoring built into it. It's part of what we do. We want to be able to kind of help provide some predictive capabilities on, like, hey, when a customer comes in, especially specifically if they're probably what I refer to as like a named account, somebody that's on your list, somebody you want to engage with, it starts to use that AI to predict based upon the engagement where this is going. If it's a really hot, potential customer that you want to continue to engage with, to move them along more quickly in that process. So it does have the capabilities to do a lot of that work. We're continuing to evolve our capabilities with our AI, and I think you'll see that continue to improve over the next several months and years. But that's definitely something that we consider kind of as table stakes, if you will, to be able to do some of that predictive scoring to help with sales leads.
Yeah, and that was an early use case just in marketing and sales, period. Like, as people were trying to look at how to apply machine learning, everybody was racing into lead scoring. It was the most obvious thing, 3, 4, 5 years ago. And some of them were okay, but what I found was happening was salespeople weren't trained on how the AI worked, and they would, the first 3 days, be recommended leads that weren't any good, and they would just give up and be like, I'm better at this than this machine is, and they would stop using the lead scoring, not realizing they needed to actually train the thing. So I saw it as potentially more of a rollout and training issue than it was the tech doesn't work. It was the tech wasn't always given the time to learn and work as it should. So, but it's just something to keep in mind with AI tech in general. Like, again, it's not a magic switch. It doesn't just like unbox the thing and, it transforms your marketing and sales the next day. There is a human in the loop element that doesn't go away. It tends to be more intensive in the early going as the human is kind of teaching the machine, and then it kind of wanes as it goes, the better the tech is. But the human doesn't go away. It's not full autonomy. We're not trying to like replace the sales rep or the marketer in this process.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's super important to understand. I mean, there's a time to get that based upon organizations, what your needs are, how you define a lead, what you consider the variables that need to be considered in terms of predicting, right? I mean, that takes time, and it will continue to mature, I think, is probably the best way to say that, but it will actually continue to advance or mature the more information it gets, right? And that's the power of AI. And so it's interesting to think through this and the potential that comes with this, and how your organizations can be benefited from a sales standpoint when they leverage AI.
And then we had a chat comment here about kind of AI versus high level automation. The way I look at this is, I actually have a line, I think I wrote it in my book in like 2014, that the great irony of automation is that it's manual. So most automation that we think of when we think of whatever the software is you use to do your job in marketing and sales, it's human-based automation. It's rules written by humans that then automate tasks. Those rules, those algorithms don't get any smarter unless the human changes it. The whole point of intelligent automation is the machine can get smarter. It can adapt. It can take different paths. It can write its own rules. So that's how I don't know how you think about it now, but that's how we differentiate between like intelligent automation versus traditional automation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with AI, it has to start somewhere. So you give initial inputs, but then it learns. It's learning, right? With traditional automation, it's really a human being managing those inputs, constantly managing and changing it. So there's a big difference between the two. And so your ability to be able to understand, account-based marketing has been massive and has been massively impactful for organizations to be able to help engage, specifically from a B2B standpoint, right? When I was at Adobe, we had acquired Marketo. Marketo was big in that space. And it was fascinating to learn more about that and how that works. But when I think about how you can actually leverage AI in a different way, it kind of takes, I think, those types of engagements to the next level, right? You're no longer having to wait to train it. And then not only that, account-based marketing isn't necessarily one-to-one. Like with at least with AI, you're able then to have it work more personally, right? So that's unique as well. So I think there's some massive benefits there.
Oh, we'll kind of wrap it. One other, if you could just touch on what is the pricing? Well, you have to get the actual price, but like, what is Drift's pricing model? Is it a user-based? Is it like seats, licenses?
So there are seat licenses, and we have 3 different packages. Each of those are depends on what additional items a customer would like to add in terms of add-ons to it as well. So,
Okay.
so that's a good question. Happy, if you engage with us, one of our folks can talk you through what that looks like, but it is seat space.
Okay.
And so that is part of what we do.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We will send access to this on demand. So if you joined us late and you want to catch the beginning, we'll send it out to you and get access to that. Now, what best way to interact with you? Are you a big LinkedIn guy? Are you Twitter? How can people connect with you?
LinkedIn probably is the best way. So catch me on LinkedIn.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much. We obviously appreciate your time and Drift's ongoing, support as a big time partner of the Institute. And, I think our organizations share a vision for, a more intelligent future for marketing and sales. And I always learn something every time I'm with somebody from Drift, and we always appreciate you all taking the time to be with us. So thank you again, Ronell.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me. And thank you everyone for joining in.
All right, everybody. Until next time, thanks for being here.